Welcome to True Crime Threads, where chilling real-life crimes unravel one thread at a time. In today's story, we follow a father's deadly obsession that escaped all boundary of 7 prison walls. In 2004, Edward Raines was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Martha. The crime shocked their small Minnesota town. Edward had once been a respected military officer, known for discipline and structure. After retirement, he struggled to adjust to civilian life. His behavior turned erratic, and those closest to him noticed he had grown cold and controlling. His temper flared without warning, and Martha, once his high school sweetheart, became the target of his anger. They had one child together, Jamie. At just 9 years old, Jamie witnessed the collapse of their home. The night of the murder, Edward and Martha had argued violently. Neighbors heard shouting, but no one intervened. The next morning, police found Martha's body in the living room. She had been strangled. Edward was arrested within hours. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being involved. It was a straightforward case. He confessed during questioning, admitting he snapped when Martha told him she was leaving. At trial, Edward showed no remorse. He spoke flatly, without emotion. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Jamie was placed in the custody of Martha's sister, and all ties to Edward were severed. From that day forward, Edward's name became a dark shadow in Jamie's past. Prison became Edward's world. He spent his days in a medium-security facility with other violent offenders. For the first few years, he remained isolated, mostly silent, often staring into space. He refused therapy, ignored letters, and never asked about his child. Years passed. Jamie grew up and began the journey of self-discovery. By the time he turned 18, he came out as transgender and began living as Jay Raines. He started hormone therapy, changed his legal documents, and stepped into a new identity. It wasn't an easy transition, but Jay found strength in his truth. Edward, however, saw it differently. Somehow, news of Jay's transition reached him through an old family connection. It lit a fire inside him that no one saw coming. In the prison yard, Edward began to change. He kept to himself, but he was always watching. Guards noted his increased physical activity. He ran laps obsessively, did hundreds of push-ups daily, and refused to miss his workout routines. He didn't socialize, didn't join prison programs, but he was always alert. He started reading again, focusing on technical manuals, building maintenance logs, and outdated escape attempts from other inmates. He was planning something. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about escaping the prison walls for a second chance at life. Edward had a singular focus: his son. In his mind, Jay's transition was a betrayal, something that had to be fixed in the most brutal way possible. He wrote disturbing notes in his journal, many filled with delusions about restoring order. His obsession consumed him. For the staff, he was just another quiet inmate with strange habits. But Edward was patient. He was waiting for the right moment. He had nothing to lose, and the outside world had someone he couldn't forget. Jay Raines had no idea that while he was building his life, the man who destroyed his past was preparing to finish what he started. In August 2022, after nearly 2 decades in prison, Edward Raines vanished. The escape was unexpected and precise, executed during a heavy storm that distracted guards and overwhelmed the security systems. Edward had spent years studying the prison's routines, mapping the shifts of the guards, and memorizing the layout of the maintenance zones. For months, he faked a chronic illness to gain access to the infirmary and nearby supply rooms. He played the role of a sick, aging inmate, drawing no suspicion. When the night came, he used a blade fashioned from broken metal hidden in his mattress to cut through the back wall of a rarely inspected supply closet. Behind it, a narrow ventilation duct connected to the old waste system. He crawled through the filth, navigating the maze-like tunnels beneath the prison, using landmarks he had committed to memory from old maintenance logs. Above ground, lightning lit up the sky. Thunder masked any noises he made during the escape. At a secure delivery bay on the outskirts of the prison, he climbed into a food supply truck scheduled to leave that night. He changed into a stolen maintenance worker's uniform, smeared himself in dirt, and lay flat beneath the shelves in the truck's rear. By the time guards realized a head count was missing, the truck had already passed through the first security checkpoint. No alarms were triggered, and surveillance cameras, blurred by the storm, failed to capture a clear image of Edward slipping away. The moment his absence was confirmed, a full lockdown was issued. Sirens blared, helicopters were dispatched, roadblocks went up across county lines. But Edward had planned his route well. He avoided highways, hitchhiked using fake names, and kept moving only at night. He used stolen IDs left behind by released inmates, picked up burner phones, and slept in cheap motels under false names. He didn't draw attention. He wore plain clothes, kept his head low, and never stayed in one place more than a single night. His military background helped him stay calm, focused, and invisible. Law enforcement agencies released a nationwide bulletin. News outlets covered the escape, warning the public that a dangerous killer was on the run. The U.S. Marshals Service joined the search, calling it one of the most serious prison escapes in recent years. Edward was labeled a top priority fugitive. Despite this, there were no reliable sightings for weeks. The few tips they received led nowhere. He had erased himself. He wasn't searching for freedom. He wasn't trying to start a new life or disappear forever. His path had a destination. The hatred that had grown inside him for years was now guiding every step. His son, Jay Raines, had become the symbol of everything Edward believed had gone wrong in the world. In his mind, Jay's identity was a crime far greater than anything he'd been locked up for. Edward's mission was personal and final. He wasn't just running from prison. He was hunting someone he once called family. With every mile he crossed, he was getting closer to the one person he blamed for his ruined legacy. The manhunt had begun, but Edward was already far ahead. Jay Raines had no idea his father had escaped. Living in Portland, Oregon, he had created a quiet, purposeful life far from the memories of his childhood. He worked at a local animal shelter, caring for injured strays and abandoned pets. The work brought him peace. On weekends, he volunteered at community centers, supporting young people navigating identity and acceptance. He lived in a small but warm apartment with his partner, Alex, someone who had stood by him through his most difficult years. Jay kept his circle small and private. He didn't share much about his past, especially not about the man who had taken his mother's life. Jay had come a long way since the dark days of his adolescence. Transitioning had been a long, painful journey, filled with therapy sessions, hard conversations, and moments of deep uncertainty, but he had rebuilt himself with care. He had changed his name legally, updated his documents, and taken full control of his future. His life was rooted in healing. The trauma was still there, but he carried it quietly, like an old scar that no longer stung but would never truly fade. To most people, Jay was just a kind man who loved animals and kept to himself. Few knew the weight he carried. One late afternoon, as Jay returned home from work, he noticed a piece of paper taped to a utility pole near his apartment building. At first, he thought it was a missing pet notice, but as he looked closer, his breath caught. It was a faded flyer with the words, "Washington, NTED, escaped Nick Ort," printed across the top. The photograph was unmistakable. It was Edward Raines, his father, the same sharp jawline, the same cold, deep-set eyes. Jay frowned. His mind raced. For a moment, he thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Then, within hours, he saw the news. A local channel ran a segment about a fugitive who had recently crossed into the Pacific Northwest. The name was confirmed. Edward had escaped prison. Jay Saturday still for a long time. He hadn't spoken or thought much about Edward in recent years. He had always assumed he would die in prison, far removed from the life Jay had created. Now, everything felt uncertain. The calm he had built over years began to shake. Jay contacted the authorities immediately and shared his concern that Edward might try to find him. Police took his statement and passed the case to federal agencies. A risk assessment was done. He was advised to increase home security and limit his public activity. Surveillance was arranged near his apartment, and Jay was placed on an informal watch list in case of any further developments. He tried to go about his days, but the fear was constant. He scanned every face on the street, checked locks twice, and avoided his usual routines. Even at the shelter, he found it hard to focus. Jay began keeping a journal again, something he hadn't done in years, writing down his thoughts each night just to manage the weight of his anxiety. While he hoped it would pass, he also knew something deep in his gut had changed. He was no longer just a survivor of the past. Now, he was a target in the present. Jay went to the police as soon as he realized his father had escaped, and within days, the U.S. Marshals included him in their protective network. Authorities believed Edward could be heading toward Oregon, and Jay's name was the only link strong enough to justify the kind of pursuit. The police placed unmarked vehicles near Jay's building, and federal agents instructed him to vary his schedule and remain alert. Jay followed every direction. Still, a constant, cold unease followed him everywhere. Even simple errands felt dangerous. He stopped going out after dark, avoided public events, and removed his name from online directories. But Edward was already closer than anyone realized. For the next few weeks, there were scattered sightings. A man matching Edward's description was seen near truck stops in northern Idaho, then again outside Spokane, Washington. Each time, law enforcement arrived hours too late. Edward never stayed in one place long. He used public libraries for internet access, wore different clothes in every town, and traveled through rural bus routes. He never spoke to locals, never used credit cards, and always kept moving. He knew how to disappear in plain sight. He had planned it all before ever setting foot outside the prison fence. Then something happened that changed everything. Jay returned home one evening and found his front door slightly ajar. Nothing had been stolen, no electronics missing, no signs of forced entry, but his framed photographs were gone, every one that included him. The walls were bare. A single sheet of paper had been left on the kitchen table. It read, "You can't hide what you are." The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, unmistakably familiar. Jay's heart pounded. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message. Edward had found him, been inside his home, and left without being seen. The apartment had felt like a safe place, but now it was a memory of fear. Jay called the police immediately. Forensic teams dusted for prints and reviewed nearby surveillance footage. A blurry figure was spotted on a camera across the street around 2:30 a.m. Wearing a hooded jacket and walking with a limp. The image wasn't clear enough to confirm identity, but the profile matched Edward's. Authorities upgraded Jay's case from precautionary to active threat. He was moved to a temporary safe house on the outskirts of Portland. It was quiet, hidden, and monitored around the clock. But Jay couldn't rest. He barely slept. Every creak in the floor, every car outside, made his heart race. Edward was now circling the city. Agents believed he had no intention of returning to a normal life. He wasn't hiding from the law, was hiding until they could strike. He had crossed multiple state lines, evaded detection, and shown complete focus on one person. They believed he had nothing else to live for. Jay knew it too. The threat wasn't going to pass. It was waiting. In his safe house, Jay began recording video journals, short clips speaking directly to the camera. He wanted his story documented, just in case. "If he finds me," he said in one recording, "I want people to know I lived. I fought. I didn't just run." His face was calm, but his voice shook. He wasn't just afraid. He was preparing. 2 weeks after Jay was relocated, a breakthrough came. A hunter in the Columbia River Gorge reported seeing a man sleeping inside an abandoned ranger outpost deep in the woods. The man fit Edward's description, then, weathered and dressed in heavy layers that didn't match the season. He had a makeshift camp, no fire, and kept a large hunting knife strapped to his leg. Authorities moved quickly. By the time they reached the site, he was gone, but they found evidence. Scraps of newspaper with Jay's face circled, a torn page from an old address book with Jay's last known location written beside it, and a cracked phone with no SIM card. It was confirmation that Edward was still watching, still chasing, and growing more desperate. Law enforcement tightened their search radius. Dozens of officers combed the woods. Helicopters scanned the tree lines. Jay was moved again, this time to an even more secure location under federal protection. His face was pulled from local press coverage to avoid drawing attention. For a while, It seemed like they might catch Edward before he reached civilization again. But Edward had been trained for survival. He had lived in combat zones, operated under stress, and endured far worse. He was aging, but determination kept him going. His body moved on instinct, his mind locked on one mission. Jay represented a life Edward refused to accept, a change that felt like a personal attack on everything he once stood for. Then, without warning, everything shifted. One morning, a police cruiser spotted a figure walking along the edge of a logging road, just 10 miles from downtown Portland. The man didn't run. He turned slowly, raised his hands, and smiled. It was Edward. He was gaunt, filthy, and sunburned, but his eyes were calm. Officers approached cautiously, expecting a struggle. Instead, Edward spoke clearly and asked to be taken to his son. He was arrested without incident. What followed shocked everyone. Inside Edward's backpack, authorities found maps with Jay's movements marked in red ink. There were photos, schedules, handwritten notes detailing Jay's volunteer shifts and shelter visits. He had been watching for months, silently preparing for a confrontation. Yet when questioned, Edward offered no explanation. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't deny his plan, but something had changed. A psychologist later stated that Edward's mind had deteriorated after years of isolation, obsession, and untreated trauma. He wasn't just dangerous, was disconnected from reality. Jay was informed of the arrest within the hour. He didn't cry. He didn't celebrate. He simply sat there in silence, the weight of the decades lifting, but not disappearing. The threat was over, but the scars remained. In the days that followed, Jay chose to speak publicly, not about his father's crimes, but about survival. He shared his story with advocacy groups, hoping it might help others who lived in fear. The man who once haunted his life would now spend the rest of his days in a psychiatric facility under maximum security. Jay returned to the animal shelter. He moved back into his apartment and began rebuilding the quiet life he had worked so hard to protect. He still checked the locks twice, still woke up some nights gasping for breath, but he was free, not because Edward was gone, but because Jay never stopped choosing to live.